Hello and welcome to the Friday show, where I don't do the news segment. I just generally get straight to my guest on Fridays. I usually pump out a Saturday show as well, so look for that. Still trying to find out who that's going to be. Hopefully Christian Finnegan, maybe someone else. Not sure, but I'm very excited to share today's guest. My interview is with a survivor of a horrible mass shooting, the one in Highland Park. But first, just want to thank everybody who joined us at the subscriber hangout. Always a great time last night. Thanks for stopping by there. I'm taping this before, so I can't tell you what exactly happened, but it's always a lot of fun. So thank you to everybody for that, and thanks for tuning in today and all week, and look forward to some more on the weekend and all of next week. I will be working Taint Week. I always do. I'll be posting a bunch of different stuff, and I'll take time off at a different time when you aren't in the car looking for this podcast. I may not go full bore next week, but I'll definitely be posting some great interviews. If you're not in the mood or emotionally prepared to hear my new friend Ashbey Beasley's story on today's podcast of surviving this shooting, I totally understand. Maybe you can come back to it later. Maybe you don't need to ever listen to this, but I thought this woman was really smart and passionate and a great advocate. I've always wanted to interview activists, grassroots activists here on this show. That's part of the brand. Stand up for something and fight apathy. Ashbey is doing just that as a result of the horror that she and her son witnessed. And she came highly recommended from a couple of people, including Sam Schwartz, who I spoke to last week, who is also a young gun violence prevention activist. And so I probably won't be talking about this issue next week, but it's one that I have been speaking to activists and experts across the entire spectrum about for my entire career, and plan to keep putting the light on it whenever possible. Of course, on July 4th, 2022, you may remember it was a 4th of July Day parade in Highland Park where 7 people were killed, 48 others were wounded by bullets or shrapnel. The authorities apprehended a 21-year-old man more than 8 hours after the shooting, charged him the next day with 7 counts of first-degree murder and a whole bunch of other charges. But the incident was one of the 2 deadliest mass shootings in Illinois history, the other being 1993 shooting that resulted in the deaths of 7 people. Ashley was there with her son, who she insisted go to the parade with her, and he was 6 at the time. They had a horrific story to tell as a result. And as a result of her surviving that mass shooting, she's become a gun violence prevention advocate, where she's now focused on federal and state gun safety legislation. She's also the founder of Hometown Advocacy and Report the Ripple, and a federal policy advisor to the Illinois Alliance to Prevent Gun Violence. In January of 2023, Ashbey testified in front of the Illinois State Senate in support of the Protect Illinois Communities Act, and was part of the grassroots effort that passed PICA into law, making Illinois the 9th state to ban assault weapons. She's also was in a video that went absolutely viral, seen by millions and millions of us. You probably saw it because she was in Nashville, and she was visiting Nashville with her son. I guess she was visiting friends, and there was, of course, a horrific shooting at a private Christian elementary school in Nashville, where 3 students and 3 staff members were killed. And so at the end of the press conference there with the Metro Nashville police, she walked up in front of the cameras, turned to reporters, and said this.
Aren't you guys tired of covering this? Aren't you guys tired of being here and having to cover all of these mass shootings? I'm from Highland Park, Illinois. My son and I survived a mass shooting over the summer. I am in Tennessee on a family vacation with my son, visiting my sister-in-law. I have been lobbying in D.C. since we survived a mass shooting in July. I have met with over 130 lawmakers. How is this still happening? How are our children still dying, and why are we failing them? Gun violence is the #1 killer of children and teens. It has overtaken cars. Assault weapons are contributing to the border crisis and fentanyl. We are arming cartels with our guns and our loose gun laws, and these shootings and these mass shootings will continue to happen until our lawmakers step up and pass gun safety legislation. I'm pretty sure this was an unsecured weapon that this teenager got a hold of. We can't even pass gun safety, like safe storage laws in this country to protect kids from getting a hold of weapons that they shoot each other with. Aren't you guys tired of this? Are you guys sick of it? We have to do something. We all have to call our lawmakers, and we all have to make our lawmakers make change now, or this is going to keep happening, and it's going to be your kid and your kid and your kid and your kid next, because it's just a matter of time.
All right. Well, that went viral back when it happened that night everywhere across the country, and I'm sure everywhere else. Really powerful. And Ashbey, of course, is an activist working with all kinds of different organizations, including this great organization called Red, Wine, and Blue, who worked with Ashbey to make this video about the harrowing account that she and her son dealt with.
My 6-year-old son and I are mass shooting survivors from Highland Park, Illinois. I took him to a parade one day, and a man climbed onto a rooftop and opened fire with an AR-15 style weapon on parade goers. He killed 7 people and injured 48 others. And since then, since July into 2022, I have been fighting for a federal assault weapon ban. I can't stop fighting because I'm afraid to send my kid to school. And I can't stop fighting because kids keep dying. My feelings on lockdown drills are that they are actively normalizing mass shootings. It's $1 billion industry, $1 billion industry that we have created instead of passing gun safety legislation. Billions of dollars that we could be using to feed kids, buy kids books, putting back into education. Just so much money is being spent to normalize mass shootings. Gun violence is everywhere. It permeates every corner of society, and it affects every single one of us. And just because it hasn't affected you yet, it's just a matter of time until it does. So I'll keep working until everyone starts lining up next to me and we get it done.
Well, I'm lining up next to her right now. Ashbey Beasley joins me on Stand Up for the first time right now. Very happy to have you taping this conversation. We're all thankful and grateful for your activism, and obviously so sorry for what you and your son have had to go through. But I really appreciate you talking to me. Hi.
Thank you for having me.
So people have just heard your commentary that day in Tennessee, and they've heard some of your thoughts around some of the policy changes that you want to get to. But I wanted to start actually by asking about your son. How old was he when you guys were witness to the horrible shooting in Highland Park? And how old is he now, and how is he doing day to day?
He was 6 when it happened. Right. And I mean, you're just never, you spend those first years just making sure your kid feels safe and loved, and to have in just an instant, it's sort of ripped away has been something that we work on every single day, just making sure that he feels safe, trying to give him back that foundation of security. And yeah, it's been a long road. He's been in therapy. He has a taxpayer funded IEP at school to help him deal with his PTSD. He still has nightmares. Sometimes he wets the bed. It's every day when there's a good day, it's great. But, we just hope that with time, we'll get back to where we were before.
What is he into? What is he interested in? What kind of things does he do? Does he have a lot of friends? Does he play, different sports or theater or video games or anything?
Yeah, he just started soccer this year, so he has his little teammates and he loves that. He actually does have a lot of friends at school. He has always been a really social person and will go up and introduce himself and be like, "Can we be friends?" So love it. That definitely hasn't changed, and so we're lucky there. But he loves Legos. In fact, Sam, who was on your show, gave him a bunch of minifigs because he loves the little minifigs, and he just he likes books. He likes Dogman.
Love it.
He likes sticks.
That's great. I love to hear more about him and what he's like. How does it come up for him and for you? It's different for everybody, but we can't imagine when and how it comes up, and obviously how you process it, how he processes it, how that's changed. Tell me a little bit about how it animates and haunts you if it does.
Well, like in the beginning, it was just really raw. Like the day after the shooting, he was sitting on our bed and he was like, my head is too full of thoughts. And then he vomited everywhere. Oh. And that happened several times where we were just like, he had a physical reaction to like just thinking about it, or, he'd go back there and he would just, it'd be very overwhelming for him. He was, especially at home, like when it was quiet, he would just get in his thoughts. And so that was a struggle, like, just trying to like make sure that he knew he was okay. And so that was really rough. But like, a year out after a year of therapy, a year of trauma therapy and EMDR and all these other things that we've done, it's still there. Like, I think people don't understand that it's really woven in deeply in him. He'll have a nightmare. He'll have like a nightmare just out of nowhere, out of the blue. Sometimes he'll wet the bed. Sometimes he won't, but it will set the stage for the entire day. He will be, he'll be irritable and frustrated and upset, and he'll walk around with it. And sometimes, he'll act out because of it. And so it comes out in like different ways, whether it's just being sad or, not sleeping well. And then it comes out like in behavior at school or with us. And, it's just an ongoing thing. Trauma is something that you live with, especially trauma like this, you live with forever, or, you know what I mean? Like you find a way to get your new normal, but it's always sort of there. And especially since he was 6, that's like a really, it's a formative age.
It's such an important conversation to talk about. There's so much new research and treatments and different modalities to deal with any kind of trauma, much less childhood trauma of any sort. And yet, it's so hard to revisit. It's so hard to, I think, deal with for anybody who's got a lot of it. We've talked about it a lot here on the program with different experts about it. But do you guys have like things that you can't unsee or unhear? Because that kind of like when those thoughts come up and come in, they must be just so haunting. If they do, was there horrible things you heard and saw that day that you just can't seem to get past?
Yeah, I try to put myself in his place and like being like, I spoke at a press conference for Senator Warnock over the summer, in the beginning of summer. His team asked me to speak at a presser about gun violence. And I asked people to imagine being 6 years old. Like imagine being 6 years old, imagine, what it was like when you were little and going to parades and all this stuff. And then I talked about like what we saw and what happened, and to imagine being 6 years old and seeing people with blood on them, like adults running and wailing. I mean, it was just the sound of people wailing uncontrollably, screaming, and like saw that. And I honestly cannot imagine. I think I saw parents cry like once when I was little. And that was very deeply, stressful for me because they were very sad about something that had happened in the news or something happening to a friend. And I had seen that was heavy. So I can't imagine being 6 years old and seeing grown adults running and sobbing and screaming and wailing and hearing, adults screaming like the shooter is coming and knowing what that means, being 6 years old and knowing what that means. I mean, he pulled my arm down when we were running at one point. He pulled my arm and I looked and he was face down on the ground. He was face down, laid flat out on the ground, and he was begging not to die. And I can't imagine being 6 years old and having fear that is just so deep that I can't move my legs. You know what I mean? And that's where he went.
I don't know what you mean. And now I've been asking about your son, but the question anybody hearing you describe that now comes up is, what about you? So just one question about how you deal with seeing your son in that fear, sharing that fear. How do you deal with that today? I mean, you just described it and you're a very articulate person about all of this, but I'm sure that's got to be really hard to talk about, think about, and relive.
I mean, I live with a lot of guilt because I took him to that parade. He didn't want to go and convinced him to get in the car. I was like, get in the car, and in that moment, like someone sent me a video of that their child had taken at the parade. And it really got to me because their child, who had never met my child and was like several blocks away in the other direction, was literally reacting in every single way, the exact same way as my son, the same words, the same, all of it. It was exactly the same experience. And in the video, you can hear the parents, like the kids, like my son and her child, were saying over and over again, like, what's happening in a very, panicked sort of voice. And I snapped at my son. I'm like, I don't know, and in the video, like, you can hear the other parents also like, I don't know, we don't know. And it's like, like when he laid down on the ground, I'm trying to figure it also when he laid down on the ground, like that was a moment for me where I was sort of like, get up. And I was frustrated. Like, you cannot lay down. We have to keep going. And it was something looking at him on the ground and hearing his voice. Like, I just stopped and laid it on the ground with him, like flat on the ground, and looked him in the eye and was like, we have to keep going. Like, Dad's coming. We have to keep going. We have to be safe. We have to get safe. And then I didn't know it at the time, but my husband had pulled up with the car and he was trapped behind just a crowd of people, just like, running. And he could see us all like down the block. Like, he could see us both on the ground. And you know what I mean? Like, the levels of trauma for people, like, he wasn't with us at the parade, so he carries that guilt. But I can't imagine being in the car and seeing that,
Everybody has their own kind of point of view, their own specific way that they saw. You can almost think about it as an ensemble cast in a film where each camera is that person's experience, and it helps you understand how individual it was based on what you heard, saw, and felt in the moment. Let me ask you about your community, Highland Park. First, what kind of community do you live in? I mean, I remember when I read about that shooting, I remember thinking, oh, this is a real kind of Americana community. It seems upper middle class. It seems like it's got some level of ethnic diversity. I don't know. It's outside Chicago, suburbs, but it seems like a pretty safe, nice place to live, the kind of place that has a 4th of July parade. What was your community like before? And then obviously I want to talk about how you have all, if you've come together. I'm sure sometimes people have different journeys and things can become obviously divisive after such a tragedy, no matter how good the people are.
Yeah, I mean, our town is diverse. We have like 3,000 Latinos that live in Highland Park. And that was, for me, something was really frustrating in the media because they didn't really talk about the people that live here. It was mostly like Highland Park is rich and white, but I think we have a very diverse community, and we, like, the town next to us, Highwood, is 50% Latino, and we share all the same resources. And so I think, there's a lot of sense of community. We have a lot of events together. And I mean, I love living here. I think, like, I've never lived in a suburb my whole life, and moving to Highland Park I was nervous about it because I've never lived in a suburb, but like, people really come together. They really do care about each other. And I felt like before the shooting, there was a lot of people that embraced each other, like, neighborhood block parties and, kids having like play dates with each other, and parents, like, that kind of thing. And it was like a really idyllic town, I think,
How has been the reaction? How does that day change? I'm guessing permanently. I'm guessing you try to be, as all towns do, strong, they say, Highland Park strong, whatever, we're going to come together. But the truth is, that location, that parade, that day, everything is now the day, to lives in infamy in a way. So how are people doing? And has there been, have you come together mostly? Has it been divisive on the issue of guns, violence, policy?
Well, Highland Park had an assault weapon ban in the city limits for years before this happened. And so I think that was something that like was brought up a lot, like, oh, the ban doesn't work, la, la, la. But like, the shooter actually lived just a couple miles, like a mile and a half in Highwood, where they don't have a ban. So he was able to buy it legally. So I think, our community is kind of known for being progressive in the beginning. Our mayor took that ban all the way to the Illinois Supreme Court to like keep it in place. But I think, after the shooting, something that like people didn't really talk about is that our community has a very great economic divide. Socioeconomic divide. There are, people that are very, very wealthy. And then there are people that, like kids that need free lunch. And there's a big divide there. And I think that after the shooting, that was very evident. There were people that were not in town. They were on vacation. And when they came back, there was a large number of people in our community who just wanted to move on. Let's not talk about it. Let's not, let's just move on. Like we weren't here. We don't want to think about this. They wanted to take down like the memorials and things like that. And I think that like in some ways people did come together, like especially people who were at the parade, like very understanding. And there's a lot of empathy among people who have been vocal and working towards change. But there is a portion of our community that is just like, let's just move on. Let's like not talk about this, even on our own block. I think there's I
think that's all fair and interesting and fair. People cope differently with different things. A lot of people just want to not think about it. And that's got to be okay, I think, to some extent, when we're talking about trauma. So let me then ask you about how you've gotten involved in activism. It's been really interesting to follow and cover this issue for so many years. I've always talked to the different anti-gun violence agencies and organizations like Brady and Moms Demand and the Giffords Group and the Bloombergs and all of these other ones. And they do great work in different ways in different places, obviously for federal legislation, state and local legislation. But we've also seen people become activists like you and like our friend Sam Schwartz, and so many moms that haven't been involved or around an actual shooting, and others. I would include myself in that in a way, but it's just, I wonder what it's like for those of you who have been involved. You and your son survived without physical injuries. Other people lost somebody that are activists. Some people like Sam lost their cousin. Other people did suffer, actually were shot, and they become activists. Who are these people? You seem to, a lot of you know each other, and how have you fallen into this movement and networked with these people? Sorry that took so long, but I'm really fascinated by all of you and how you've turned into activists.
I mean, I think something that I'm learning like through this, like I've been in this for about 1.5 years now. And something that I'm learning is that like everybody's perspective is really important. And I think like we can't make change unless we connect with other people who are not in this fight. So they join the fight with us. And I think, in the beginning, it was just for me, like, we need to solve gun violence problems. But over time, it has become really apparent to me that we have to start focusing on gun violence from every single angle. We have to start expanding the conversation to include people who are uninjured. You have somebody like Alea Eastman who hid underneath a classmate's body at Parkland. She hid under a classmate's body. I cannot even fathom how traumatic that was and how devastating that is. She's not part of the conversation. We don't talk about her because she wasn't hurt. You know what I mean? We have like Caitlin Gonzalez in Uvalde, Texas, who I know also, and climbed out of a window and ran for her life. And she's not part of the conversation. Uninjured survivors we don't talk about like the trauma that they carry. And, like there's Moms in Covenant, who I also know, and they are working really hard to make people see, this new perspective, because like, and I'm living it, like I just did an interview with Parents Magazine, and they had a psychologist on there that was saying like trauma manifests in like these different ways. And like, we see it, we see all the things they listed, like nightmares, agitation, like all these things, like we're living it day in and day out. So I think like that is what the community has like brought to me. It's that all these different perspectives are extremely important. And that if we are going to solve gun violence, we have to start listening to every perspective of people who have been touched by gun violence or experienced it, because someone out there will connect to that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it sounds like that you're talking about, before we solve the violence, we have to deal with the victims and survivors. People use different terminology, obviously, of the gun violence. And how do we do that? As long as the violence is here, people are going to suffer in the myriad of ways that you've already discussed that you and your son have suffered and dealt with. And so what are we going to do? And I feel like the answers to that generally are different resources that need funding to help people cope and move on with their lives. I don't know specifically. I'm sure it's different for different people, but some people don't need those resources. Some people have good health insurance and they have family and a network, and they can deal and cope with it better, as opposed to somebody else who very well might not have any of that. And so it's a range, and it matters. That's what I'm hearing you say. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, like after the shooting, there were people in Highland Park. There were people who couldn't go to work. Like they were so traumatized and so devastated that they couldn't work, and I feel that, with something like a mass shooting, like someone shouldn't have to choose between going to work and being able to pay their bills and staying home and taking care of their families.
Nobody wants that person at work either. Like I don't want somebody who's suffering with emotional anything, because it's not going to be great for anybody. So it's like, fund that until they get back on their feet, not unlike any other injury.
And also, our communities aren't healthy when we have all these people that are witnessing gun violence and they don't have the resources to care for themselves, to take the time that they need to get mental health care. Like that makes our communities not healthy, which begets more gun violence. So it's like a multifaceted problem.
What have you seen? I appreciate that kind of comprehensive look at all of it, but what have you learned as on this journey and meeting all these other people, these other activists? What's good about it? What's working, and where do the challenges lie?
I think, like, for me personally, like, I've just made amazing connections with people who just understand, like you know what I mean? Yep. Like, even though our trauma is different, our experiences are different, like we still understand each other, embrace each other, and also elevate each other's stories, in different ways, like through social media or any of those things. We really do try to help each other, and we are all joined together on one goal, which is, trying to end gun violence. So, I mean, I think that like that is also a support network for me, just because they understand in a way that like a lot of people don't understand, if that makes sense.
I think it does make sense. I do think that when people are brought together through a tragedy, the silver lining is, hey, new friends who understand what I went through. And that's true of the 9/11 families. It's true of the Highland Park or any shooting families. So, I mean, I think, victims of shootings, I think that's wonderful and beautiful and part of the human experience. And I'm glad that that's been yours. I'm sure it's not the case. I'm sure probably most people turn inward and they don't make new friends and they don't become activists, and they just try to go on. And that's got to be their journey too. But I'm sure it's really, really hard for those people that feel alone.
Mm-hmm. And also, like, I think too, like being in this space, like as soon as you start learning about what is like, how, like the fact that like, the majority of people who use an AR-15 style weapon to do a mass shooting buy it legally. What are you talking about? Stop, full stop. Like when I learned that, my head exploded. And when you see how like, we have lawmakers who are not listening to their constituents, who are just ignoring what their constituents are asking for, that like over 90% of Americans want, universal background checks. I think you start to get mad. And I feel like for me, like, I just was like, nope, like, what do you, like, we have to do something. And if it's going to be me, and then I'm going to, do my part. And so, yeah, like that is definitely something that, like for me, like when I started learning the statistics, when I started learning the numbers, when I realized that AR-15s and other, loose gun laws around these kinds of weapons are actually arming cartels in Mexico, creating, issues at the border, like affecting immigration, all of this stuff. Like I can't stop. I still can't stop. So
this has become a full-time job for you.
Yeah, I just did a tally, and I've met with like over 200 and some odd lawmakers, the White House, just, and a lot of it, like I've had to fund on my own because I kind of do it on my own. Like I've had to like sort of like, like do like a crash course in lobbying. I do work with groups and sometimes collaborate with them on stuff, but I also like working on my own because I can just pivot if I need to, and I don't have to like apologize for saying something in a meeting.
Yeah, for sure. I appreciate that autonomy as well. I work out of a shed now as opposed to the corporate world of media that I so long did. And I hear you on that. So what do you think? What are you focused on, if any policy? You talked about assault weapons. Is it the assault weapons ban? Is there some policy or another? And what have you seen work in terms of lobbying? Because there's obviously state laws, there's local laws, there's state laws, and obviously federal laws. And we have made a lot of impact and a lot of changes at the state level in your state, in my state of New York, and states like Connecticut and California and others. There are a lot of laws, and I feel like activists deserve wins. And it really frustrates me when people say nothing ever changes, because the activists are changing things at the state level. Granted, we have the Senate, which is very hard to get around, and obviously the Supreme Court too often is the decider. But we do get wins. I'm sure you've had wins and seen wins. But what is your strategy if there is one in terms of it being focused, working with this group on that policy or anything else?
Well, for me, honestly, I worked on the Protect Illinois Communities Act. I testified in front of the Senate, and I'm extremely proud of that passing. But also for me, in the same vein, it's like guns don't adhere to borders, and gun trafficking is a huge problem in any state that has strong gun laws, just like California and New York. What you have to worry about is the states around it, because your state isn't an island. So I'm really focused on federal legislation, because I think that is the only way that we are going to protect as many people as possible. And so with that, I definitely think an assault weapon ban is really important. I mean, I think people don't talk enough about those weapons. I mean, they were invented and created in the 1950s for combat, for war. And the Armalite Rifle Company created the AR-15 and tried to sell it to the government and couldn't. So they sold it to Colt, the patent to Colt. Colt also couldn't sell it to the government. So they redesigned it into the M16, which is a fully automatic weapon. And that's what they used in Vietnam. And then after, towards the 60s, Colt revived the AR-15 and marketed it to hunters and police officers. And so when people are it's not a weapon of war, it is literally a weapon of war. Yeah. That's what it was designed for. So I think, in 1986, we banned the sale and manufacture of guns like the M16 and fully automatic weapons. And an interesting thing, sorry, I kind of got off track there, but an interesting thing about the AR-15 is that it uses a gas operated system with a rotating bolt. So what that means is that it's like a puff of gas that it lives in the muzzle or in the chamber, and it helps to rotate the bolt that will expel a spent casing and then load the next round. And it's a very simple system that was developed in Europe in the 1800s. But the AK-47 and the M16 both use the exact same system, and they are banned. So I'm just for me, that is at the top of my list. Poe Murray often talks about how once we pass an assault weapon ban, that is the hardest thing to pass. And once we do that, then we can pass everything else under it, because it will be easier, because that is the hardest thing to pass. So that has been one of my priorities. There's a new bill called Go Safe that is also looking to restrict and regulate some of the most lethal weapons. And then obviously safe storage, because I'm a boy mom, and boys are majority of unintentional shootings happen to boys. So, I think that it's such I don't understand how we live in a place. Huh?
You said the majority of unintentional shootings happen to boys. You're talking about accidents? But
yeah, I don't call them accidents because they're preventable, but yes,
fair enough.
Unintentional shootings.
But I believe the suicide rates with boys, adolescent boys, is far higher than girls. And furthermore, when they use a gun, it almost always is. So I think suicides with boys is also something that safe gun prevention would help bring down, if not prevent.
Well, yeah. Also, unsecured weapons lead to suicide. They contribute to suicides. They contribute to unintentional shootings, and they also contribute to school shootings. We know 67% of school shooters, underage school shooters, the median age is 16. They get their gun from home or from the home of a friend or a relative. An unsecured weapon.
Yeah, it's so easy to understand why you should make it harder for someone to get a gun. And then if someone does get a gun, you should have laws that make it them responsible for its use and keeping it safe and incentivizing them. And that would be something that we could compromise on, and they could still have a gun, but there would be a lot less violence and death if you did those many kinds of things, many of which that you've mentioned here. So Republicans
are crazy. Let me just tell you, I've met with Matt Gaetz. We had a conversation about safe storage, and I was literally like, it's like seatbelts. Like, the majority of drivers don't need a seatbelt reminder, but because there is a law that makes it illegal to drive without seatbelts, you have people putting on seatbelts who might not put them on because they don't want to get a ticket, right? And this is similar. This is putting responsibility on people and consequences for not doing this, not keeping guns, inaccessible. And he looked at me and he said, yeah, what if I don't believe in seatbelts? And I'm like, what?
That was,
what?
That's surprising. Well, I mean,
that's a direct quote.
The seatbelt thing is like more like legitimately I can't speak. The incentive is that beeping sound.
Yeah.
Like, that's what makes you put it on. It's like, I don't care if I live or die, but I got to stop that beeping sound. And you could do that and so many other things around guns. He usually has a smart ass answer or a believable argument to some people that I wouldn't. But to say, what if I don't like seatbelts is ridiculous. A lot of times people use the Constitution. Well, there's nothing in the Constitution about seatbelts or car safety. And that, of course, is preposterous, too, because we're talking about every single right that is afforded to us does have regulations and rules. You can't yell, fire in a crowded theater. But let me just, so I guess you've learned a lot about how Congress works, and you understand that the bottom line is the Senate, the way it's made up, the way they're elected in the filibuster, if you want to pass any piece of legislation about anything. And that's what seems to be insurmountable given the filibuster and so on. Is that true, or do you not think a lot about that being the last point? The last stop, I guess, is the Supreme Court overturning any wins.
I mean, I feel like everything dies in the Senate. That is literally my tagline. It's so frustrating. It's so frustrating. Yeah. Even when we had a majority, we couldn't move, Leader Schumer to put the assault weapon ban on the floor for a full vote. Like, I've argued with Durbin, directly argued with him.
Well, their argument, what do you think of their argument? I think it's fairly valid that if you put it down for a vote, you'd lose potentially two senators, the one from Arizona and the one from Montana, Tester and Mark Kelly, and then you wouldn't have Democratic majority anymore, and you would get nothing done. So forget about anything guns. What do you think about that? I think that's their argument.
Well, I mean, they have a couple arguments. Some of them are, if they mark it up, then a ton of amendments will be thrown at it, and that will weaken the bill when they do have the votes. I think for me, looking at some of our previous important pieces of legislation that we've passed, like Brady background checks, they pushed that through it took 7 years, 6 votes, and 3 presidents to pass it. They didn't just sit on it. They kept pushing and pushing and pushing until they got it done. And I think that, the assault weapon ban and any kind of major, regulation, like even Go Safe, are that's a marathon. It's not, it's not a sprint. So I'm here, I'm here for the long haul. But I think also that theoretically, if we did lose Tester, if we did lose some of these guys, there's flippable seats in other states. You know what I mean? That we have to get them all out. There are flippable Republican seats in the Senate that we are working on really, really hard to get Democrats into those seats. So while I understand that, they want to protect maybe the seats of these two Democrats because they want to hold on to those, I think we're forgetting that the bigger picture is that maybe we lose those 2 seats, but maybe we gain 7 seats or 10 seats or 20. You know what I mean? People are working at this every single day.
I support all those people. I don't see that as realistically happening, but I'd love to be wrong, and I will support every one of those campaigns. Let me just ask you one more question that I think we haven't covered. I feel like you've commented on, and I'm really interested in this because there's been some interesting work on the coverage research on the coverage of specifically of mass shootings. And the way that all of the media shows up for a couple of days and then, descends. And then I talked a little bit about this with Sam, but some people think that the over coverage of these shootings helps perpetuate potentially more shootings or recreates drama or is really unnecessary. I think that's it's a hard argument to make that what are journalists and cameras and local news outlets supposed to be, quote, responsible and look away from something like this? I don't know that that's necessarily responsible. But furthermore, they're always going to do it. I mean, let's be honest. Sensational violence of any sort is going to get clicks, is going to sell advertising, subscriptions, and whatever makes money. But what are your thoughts on the coverage and its effect of specifically the type of shooting that you lived through?
I think it's important to talk about it. I think it's important to gain every single perspective. But I also, one of the things that I do is that because I'm Native American and not white, I try really hard to keep making sure that I'm part of the conversation, because I feel like people of color are underrepresented, especially in, in mass shooting incidents that happen in, affluent white communities. So I try really hard. That's something that I try really hard. But I also think that we, people of color who live in communities where mass shootings happen every single day and they don't get any coverage, like every single day in urban communities, I think we have to come together and make sure that we are putting people in those communities in front of cameras. And if our news feeds are just nothing but constantly talking about even, the smallest amount of people affected by a mass shooting, so be it. Because this is happening every single day. Over 120 people are being killed by gun violence every single day. Do you know what I mean? And we have children living in urban Black and brown communities that are seeing gun violence day after day after day. They're afraid to walk to school. You know what I mean? And I think that we just have to keep putting it up front there. And we have to start shifting the spotlight to communities where this is happening constantly. And we haven't really been doing that. So I've talked to people in, Chicago, and I want to help them make sure that they are putting their communities in the spotlight, because honestly, I don't think people have any idea how often gun violence is happening. And one of the things that I'm working on for 2024 is a hearing to examine the economic impact that mass shootings have on communities and individual families.
That's a really interesting and important point to make, and might move some people.
Well, so, ultimately, our family has we went and looked at our insurance, and we've spent through insurance, $25,000 on therapy for our 7-year-old. That's insane. We are lucky that we have really good insurance. My husband has a good job. He could take time off of work. We are very, very lucky. And so when I started looking at that and talking to people in my community who have similar expenses for what it costs, it became very clear to me that they're not able to do this in other communities. Like Willowbrook, which is an hour from Highland Park, had a mass shooting, 23 shot, 1 dead. It was barely a blip. There were no teams that went there to give these survivors therapy, there were no piles of free stuffed animals like we had in Highland Park. And so I think shedding a light on and saying, hey, look, I talked to my mayor about it, and I'm like, this is the framework. This is the case study. Highland Park, who has the ability to have all these resources, every resource needed. We can look at that and we can say, this is what it costs to take care of people after a mass shooting, whether they're uninjured, whether they're injured, if they lose somebody, these are the costs, because our community has the resources to do what we need to do to take care of ourselves. And then we can apply that to communities, in urban communities and Black and brown communities where they don't have the resources to do that. And we can say, this is how much we need to spend to take care of these people. This is how much we need to spend to keep, communities where there's gun violence day in and day out healthy and prevent future gun violence. And so it's something I'm working on. And I just think it's another way to look at it, because when I meet with Republicans, I always try to come at them with
they
their
want
own
these fiscal arguments that they make and never actually then want to pay for, because they'll always make arguments about mental health as a solution and then just not pay for it. It's just such a cop out, and it's such a terrible thing in so many ways. Well, listen, I could talk to you forever. I want to hear more about your experiences in Washington and elsewhere, but I'm going to be kind and let you go back at the fight, because it's been great to talk with you, Ashbey. I really appreciate all the work that you're doing, and the best of luck to your son, your family, and everybody in your community, and keep doing everything you're doing, because you are a great role model for so many other people. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right, there you go. Ashbey Beasley, first time on the show. Please go say hello to her. Every way to contact her is in today's show links. Wherever you listen, write a rating or a review on iTunes, on Spotify. Subscribe on YouTube, where I'll be posting more of these interviews each and every day. And thank you so much for those that support with a paid subscription. If you haven't, sign up now. Patreon.com/Pete Dominic. Love you, bumblebees, listening all the way to the end. I will talk to you tomorrow.
Boy, you better stand up. When you're tired of begging, saying pretty please, that's the time you gotta finally get up off of your knees. When you can't see the forest for the burning trees, you got to stand up. Hey, you've been sitting so long, you got the creaky knees, you got to stand up. Stand up. I think you're driving wheels with leaking grease. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know what's right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You gotta stand up. That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You gotta stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See, all you hear is a lie. Don't get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. This is the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up. Stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up. They had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change would begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. Alright, we got to speak up, we got to reach up, and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it than now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand